Welcome, everyone. My name is Veronica Sullivan. I am the Division Director for the Division of IDEA Implementation in Preschool, and I'm glad that you all can join us. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you are joining us, please make sure your camera is turned off so that we have better bandwidth and you can hear the presenters more clearly. We ask that everyone please keep your mics muted. If you have questions related to the presentation or other questions, please put those in the chat and we will collect those questions at the end of the session. As we've shared information about this webcast across the state, we've indicated that it will be posted on the KDE website, and we will do that. It may be a few days before we get that up, but I just want to let you know it will be recorded and will be posted. So I'm excited to start off. This is the first series that we are hosting with our special education regional cooperatives. They are going to share resources with you over the next coming weeks to help support you in non-traditional instruction across the state for students with disabilities. And our first presenter I'm going to introduce is Debbie Mays from the OVAC region. Go ahead, Debbie. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good morning. We are here on behalf of the cooperatives to talk about managing specially designed instruction within NTI, which is our non-traditional instruction. So I'm Debbie Mays, and as she said, I'm from the Ohio Valley Educational Cooperative, otherwise known as OVEC. I also have with me Kim Landrum, who's from OVEC, and Tammy Williams from the Western Kentucky Educational Cooperative. On our agenda today, for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to look at where we are in the continuum of educational services provided for all students and look at some options and resources for SDI for students with disabilities. At the end of this session, we will request you give us some feedback so that as we plan these weekly sessions, we can address your needs. First of all, we wanted to bring to your attention this graphic which defines SDI that KDE recently published. If you do not have it, it's available on the KDE website, or your cooperatives would be happy to share it with you. This continuum, which was provided by the Council of Administrators of Special Education, otherwise known as CASE, outlines where our schools and districts lie. Thinking about where your district is, today we are addressing the middle three sections. Where does your district fall? Are you providing homework packets which are primarily supported by parents or guardians? Are teachers and service providers actively checking in with students and supporting their learning? Or are you providing structured e-learning activities which are teacher-directed, student-implemented, and assessed for progress? Perhaps there's some of each going on in your districts. Looking at this next slide, there are some questions we need to address about where we are in this continuum. This helps to guide our focus of our efforts depending on where we are at this time. Are we providing homework packets? If so, I know we're working hard as a state to document that NTI work that we provide for all students. As we provide this work to all students, we must be sure all students can access it and we address their needs. If we're providing continuous learning opportunities, is it accessible? Is student work for students with disabilities also focused on those IEP goals, and are we trying to engage all students? Maybe we're moving towards uniquely tailoring our instruction through e-learning to the individual student, and maybe our services are moving towards high quality, as much high quality as possible. It is the special education teacher's responsibility to adapt the content, methodology, or delivery to address the unique needs of the student and to ensure access to the general curriculum. Are we mirroring typical SDI as much as possible given the circumstances? Our modeling, scaffolding, and explicit instruction can be delivered virtually or sometimes by phone. There are ways we can do this with what we have, but it is a definite time to be creative. So how do we provide SDI in NTI? Our SDI still must be individualized and based on those student needs. Guidance does note that all services may not look the same in our current situation, but we can still provide services as many modifications and services may be provided through other means. We must communicate with the parents and take time to understand their capacity to assist at this time. So in this current situation, it is imperative that we talk with the parents. We need to have a plan to communicate with the parent or the guardian. Are they able to assist their student? They may be still working. They may not. How much can they assist? Do they need additional support? Perhaps they need coaching or a preview of work, or maybe an answer key would be helpful. So what SDI methods can you use? Here is a list of potential venues that are currently happening around the state. In this current situation, if we can't provide virtual SDI to our students, we need to be creative. And as a state, we are creative. Personally, it might be my healthy at home that's getting to me, but I am very proud to be working in the field of education in Kentucky. You're an incredible bunch of folks, and I know we can figure this out. So next, we are going to address some sample ways to provide SDI in this environment and show you some resources. I'm going to hand it over to Kim.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. What I'm going to go over is probably going to sound pretty basic, but I think in this time we need to just kind of stay with the basics and then think about, once we get used to doing SDI in the field of the non-traditional instruction, then we can kind of branch out a little bit. So when we were creating this PowerPoint, what we thought about was kind of 4 core areas where SDI is typically on an IEP. We did reading, writing, mathematics, and then behavior as well. And so starting with the idea of reading, when we talked about this, we just talked about something that would typically be on an IEP aligned with SDI. So vocabulary instruction is something that is on a lot of IEPs. So when you think about how do we provide that vocabulary instruction now that we are in this world of NTI? So going back to the continuum that Debbie showed, some districts and some students are still in that packet area where they're receiving packets, versus others are actually able to have more an e-learning experience. So we provided examples in both of those areas. The first example, if you're thinking about a packet, is a lot more challenging because we don't have that face-to-face, or we don't even have that phone call interaction necessarily. Hopefully, most of the time we can have a phone call interaction, but for some kids out there, that might not even be possible. So what we discussed is thinking about vocabulary. If a packet is going home, maybe looking at that packet, identifying key vocabulary where we know our students with special needs are going to really struggle with that vocabulary, and then providing more visual strategies with them. One way you can provide visual strategies is mnemonics. Everything that is in the red does have a link to explain how to do that. And so again, thinking about how can we provide a student vocabulary instruction without necessarily seeing them eye to eye, but creating that visual. Within that visual, we probably would have to do text boxes, or we might even be able to send a video if they have a smartphone where the child could watch that. So there is still a little bit of interaction, but really thinking about how to use visual strategies there. If you're doing vocabulary instruction in the e-learning via Zoom or Microsoft or Teams or Skype, it makes it a little bit easier to do what you would typically do in the classroom. So a lot of times what we do is we front load vocabulary for several of our students. So if this child is in a co-taught setting, let's say, you're still planning, or teachers are still planning with their co-teacher. The 2 teachers talk about it. They decide what the key vocabulary in that lesson is going to do. And then maybe the special education teacher meets with a small group ahead of time, kind of front loading that vocabulary, or meet individually with students and front load that vocabulary before they actually participate in the main lesson with the rest of the class. The example that we used with writing is the explicit instruction in using a graphic organizer. Again, this is something that we often find on IEPs, so that's one of the reasons why we chose it. And there is a link to explain the use of a graphic organizer. And when you're thinking about using a graphic organizer, very similar to how you probably taught it, or how teachers probably taught it in the classroom, would be using task analysis, step by step. How do we use this graphic organizer? What is step 1? What is step 2? What is step 3? Again, using those visuals and those directions. Are you guys having, are you guys hearing the echo? I guess it's okay now. Are you guys there? Debbie?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yes,
okay,
we're here.
So with task analysis, again, looking at that step-by-step visuals, looking at those, providing directions, again, looking at either doing text box or videos. One thing to keep in mind when teachers or letting your teachers know what they are creating text box, we have to think about the level of reading. If you're going to make it on the student level, make sure that we take into consideration what their reading level is. And again, if parents can help or how involved the parents are, then we can maybe write a little bit more detailed instruction if the parent is able to help. Going forward, again, back to the e-learning experience, it goes again using these different platforms we have, whether it's Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Skype, there's a variety of different platforms out there, looking again at doing that small group or individualized instruction on how to use that graphic organizer. Again, it can be the same example as previous, looking at co-teaching, maybe doing this before or after the lesson. So if they're engaged in a lesson with the whole entire group, and after the lesson is done, their goal is to work on a writing piece, that special education teacher can get on and work with students individually or small group, providing explicit instruction on how to use that graphic organizer. I can ready for the next slide. So then with math, what we did with math, and again, this is just because these are common things that are in IEPs, we talked about the use of explicit instruction and modeling. And with explicit instruction and modeling, again, we kind of gave the same examples that we did before, thinking about that task analysis with pictures. So showing them many examples of how to solve the problem, showing them pictures, showing them step by step, and again, using that video or text box. Same with e-learning. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot, but the same idea of modeling those problems, you know, step by step. A lot of the technology that's out there, and we posted, Tammy's going to go over some of the stuff that we have posted on a website to give you guys additional support. But some of the platforms have the availability of a whiteboard. So you actually can use whiteboards just like you're in the classroom and write problems out and really model that. I know Zoom has that feature. So again, you can still do a lot of the same stuff that you were doing in the classroom, just now in the environment of online. So the last one we did was behavior. We've been told that that's where a lot of individuals are struggling, is this idea of behavior in this new online world, which is by far, in my opinion, probably the most challenging as well. So again, we just picked 2 common strategies are out there. We did check-in, check-out, which a lot of districts use. There's some districts in the state that are using it very successfully, and we're able to kind of turn it over to the NTI world. And hopefully they'll be, I know they're doing spotlights at different districts, so hopefully that district will reach out to be a spotlight. But one of the things that they did is they went ahead and looked at the behaviors that they had on their check-in and check-out, and they adapted them to kind of fit into the home environment. And then the way they're doing their check-in, check-out is a phone call, if that's available. The other thing that we threw in there, and we don't necessarily expect districts to be doing this, but you could technically do a social distancing or a house call. You could go to different individuals' houses and keep 6 feet away and check in. Again, we threw that in there, just why not, but not that we're expecting districts to necessarily do that, but that is an option. If you go over, I'll go over the next 2 in a second. If you go over, again, if you have the availability of Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype, you can easily check in with your students at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day. And the second thing that we put up there were a variety of different strategies. The link there with strategies is actually linked to the University of Missouri. They have a whole site for evidence-based practices, and they have a variety of different strategies to use. And so the one specific that I was going to look at was just choice, and the link to choice actually takes you to a different website. Kathleen Lane out of Kansas University has a website. If you guys aren't familiar with it, we put it on the website that Tammy's going to talk about, is CI3T. And what she did, which I thought was really amazing, is she took evidence-based behavioral practice that we're aware of and went ahead and already said, okay, so we've done choice in the school. Now, how do you implement that in a home environment? And she gave us a lot of skills, a lot of just resources with that. So I think that will be a great resource for districts that are struggling with how do we kind of adapt all of this to homebound, or not, shouldn't say homebound, sorry, non-traditional instruction or e-learning. So the examples that we kind of talked about, that if you're doing those packet examples, again, you can look at social stories and send social stories home. You can look at social problem activities. Again, a lot of that's going to be more that written part, but there's resources out there for you. If you're doing it via e-learning, one of the examples that we talked about was if some of the behaviors are interacting with peers or taking turns or things like that. Two of the things that you could use is you could host an online lunch bunch. So again, you're focusing on much more the behavior and the social aspect and having kids interact and how do we focus on conversations and things like that. And then House Party is an application that's very similar to Zoom, but it has games on it. So kids can go on. I forget all four of the games. I know Tammy's going to talk about it a little bit more too, but I know they have like Trivia, Pursuit on there. They have Pictionary on there. So again, a teacher can host a house party and then the kids can go on there and they can, practice taking turns, how are you appropriate with with your peers, and those kind of goals that they have in their IEPs. Okay, you can switch to the next. So other things to consider, and I apologize, there's so much on this slide. I usually don't put this many words on a slide, but since you guys will be able to go back and look at this, we decided to go ahead and keep all this. But other things just to consider when you're thinking about SDI. The first thing that we have to consider is we have to consider the developmental level of a student. What's appropriate for a kindergartner or a first grader might not be appropriate for a high schooler. And so we really have to think about where the student is and what's appropriate. How do we adapt that? We have to also think about the availability of technology within the home, that ability to communicate with the family, to assist in understanding the instruction. There might be language barriers. There might be that both families are working. There might be limited technology. So again, really understanding how all that plays into it and how's the best way to meet those students. When using an online platform, you can still focus on behaviors such as turn taking, attending to the teacher, following instructions. Again, I know next week is talking about progress monitoring, but again, you can still focus and do SDI on a lot of those things. The one thing that we talked a lot about was looking at the IEPs and thinking about the generalization piece. So one of the things that we always want for kids is we want them to be able to generalize a lot of these strategies that we are giving them. So now a lot of the behavioral goals that they had, they're able to have an opportunity to generalize them to the home setting. So one of the suggestions from a behavior analyst that I got was if there's behavior goals, including interacting with peers, adjust them to interacting with siblings. Again, if possible, not everybody has siblings. If the behavior goals includes interacting with a teacher, again, adjust them to interacting with the parents. And so you might have to tweak the goal a little. I'm not suggesting changing it, but tweaking it or just adjusting it to make it work within the environment that we're working in now. As much as possible, we should continue to use the same SDI we are. I don't want to overwhelm teachers and try to throw out everything we did and do it brand new. So again, looking at those IEPs and figuring out, okay, how can we make sure that we're implementing this SDI in the new environment as much as possible? And then the last thing, actually, I'm going to say one more thing after this, sorry. The last thing on this slide is just remember at this time, we really need to be focusing on appropriate. So we have to look at what the entire school's doing. We need to look at, what are we doing for our general education students? And are we making sure that it's appropriate for our students with disabilities as well? So if your whole entire district is on Zoom and online learning and special education or students with disabilities are still only receiving packets, we have to kind of question, okay, is that appropriate? Is that equitable? And we just need to make sure that we keep that in mind when we're talking about this. The last thing that I forgot to say on the other one, so sorry, is talking about different ways. Once teachers kind of get used to technology and using it, I was reading an article last night in Ed Week, and it was talking about using TikTok, which is, I've never personally used it, but talking about doing videos, and it can be really fun. And it's a great way to get kids involved. And so again, those are places that we can start to go to once the teachers kind of get familiar with being online and doing this. But right now, we want to just kind of focus on the basics and get as much SDI to these students that we can. And for those teachers that are, and that you guys know your teachers, so those teachers in the districts that are willing to kind of step out of the norm, maybe TikTok is something that they can have fun with and go there. So, okay, I'm going to hand it over to Tammy now, and she's going to show you the where a lot of resources are.
Okay, good morning. We're going to take you now to the Kentucky Dose support site, which many, if not all of you, are familiar with. We at least hope you are. Just a little background, this site was created, I believe, 2 years ago through a collaborative effort among the regional co-op directors. And it is currently maintained by Patty Grable, my special ed co-op director from WKEC. So we know that we all are, especially directors, bombarded daily with a multitude of emails, resource links regarding special ed in the midst of COVID-19. And we want to assist you as much as possible in streamlining and organizing this information into an easily accessible format. We understand the daily challenges you are facing of keeping track of all the emails that are coming through at this time, and this is just one effort that we are making on your behalf. So we're going to take you to a link to that site. And as you see, the big bold heading, new resources for instruction during a school closing due to coronavirus. So there are two ways to access the resources that have been uploaded for you. You can go directly to this link, and then you'll see up in the toolbar at the top, their header bar, that we have 4 main categories of resources that we have organized for you. So I'm just going to take you through a brief look at a few of these resources with the primary focus of why we're here today, and that is our instructional practices in supporting SDI. So the first link takes us to administrative resources, which includes a variety of things that we've received from not only Kentucky, but from the federal level. And you'll see that we have all the webinars, webcasts, fact sheets, emails from KDE regarding FERPA, regarding electronic signatures. We've housed all of this stuff here for your easy and quick access. Again, the federal resources that we've received can be found here, along with some miscellaneous resources. There are some parent resources. I'm not going to go into those, but I did want to draw your attention here. Here are all the letters from OSIL, sample letters to parents and students regarding COVID-19. Then we go to staff considerations, and I know we have opportunities now for teachers, paraprofessionals, different staff entities that have a little bit more time on their hands that they can do some learning opportunities. So we've tried to house some of those resources here for you, and as some additional guidance for service delivery for related service personnel. So let's now go to our main focus today, and that is the instructional resources. You'll find here that these have been organized under some different headings: basic general instructional resources, resources for particular focus area of teachers, low incidence, SLPs, so forth. And then at the bottom, we have some resources specific to special ed teachers. And because we know that you are, or our teachers are struggling most, or we're hearing most in the area of providing SDI related to social, emotional, and behavioral goals, that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time. First, I want to take you back to the top of the page, and we're going to look at a couple of documents, resources under instructional resources. And the first one is a document that Northern Kentucky has put together for us. And it has a lot of great information. The first section pertaining to what platform, if we're using a virtual online platform. I know many of our teachers, that's all they need. They need to make sure that they can use an optional platform. So you can see some of the variety of things there like Flipgrid, Google Classroom. And again, we urge our teachers to stick with things they are most comfortable with, most familiar with, and student friendly. But this document contains a variety of resources related to content areas, and I know I'm scrolling through this quickly, but as well as early childhood behavior, social emotional learning, and English language learners. The next thing I want to show you under this heading is educational companies offering free resources. This is a document that was found through the Amazing Educational Resources site. And I'm not going to scroll through this because you'll probably, number one, get dizzy. There's so much information. But it houses a great deal of information for different subjects, different grade bands, and provides you information as far as whether they are a free service and gives you a description. The next thing I want to take you to is we're going to go ahead and move on down to the resources for special education teachers under behavior and mental health. We're going to look at this first link, which is social emotional learning online lessons. I feel like this site is organized very well for user accessibility. You'll see at the top there are 4 main tabs, the first one being worksheets. Then we have online videos, read aloud stories, and website resources. So under this section, you'll see it's very easy for a teacher to look at a target skill that might already be a focus of their IEP goals, and that will take them to some great resources. I'm going to go down to social stories and show you where this takes you. It takes you to a large variety of social stories given the situation that we're sitting in right now with school closures due to the virus. And what I noticed here as you scroll through here, there are a number of social stories related to coping during the coronavirus and how to explain that to our children. So I think this is a great resource as we sit in the midst of this pandemic. Oops, excuse me. Just a quick look at the behavioral mental health link. This is a one-pager, but it has a multitude of links to it, some related to instruction and other things related to other resources that we might need to access during this time. So that's just a quick look at that particular resource. Next, I'm going to take you to the site that Kim was mentioning, the CI3T, the Comprehensive Integrated 3-Tier Model of Prevention. And if you scroll down, you'll see links to all of those family resource support documents that Kim mentioned. Those of you that viewed the CASE webinar recently, I know the CASE executive board, especially Aaron McGuire, the president, keeps mentioning our obligation at this time to include, or promote parent involvement. And this is a great opportunity for that. And so you'll see all of the home resources. And since Kim touched on choice, I'm just going to open up the choice checklist. This is an example of the documents that you can choose from on this site for families to use. It's a step-by-step guide, as you see. And we could actually turn these into things that support us if we do any type of virtual lessons with a child as well. So we talked about, I'm going to show you one last thing. We talked earlier a little bit about districts that have check-in, check-out, which is an evidence-based practice for supporting students with social, emotional, or behavioral disabilities. And we're all, or most of us are familiar with the check-in, check-out system that is often found that links within our district-wide or school-wide PBIS system. This is just another take on a process of checking in and with a student daily. And what I found good about this is using Google Forms. This is a visual of that. But this sort of relates to another system that many of us are using as SDI, and that's that zones of regulation. The visuals remind me of that program. But as you scroll down, this site gives you all the directions of how to use the available forms that are here. Here is the link to access those Google Slides and templates. And there's a template for individualizing the form to meet your students' needs if you don't like the sample forms. Another great thing about this is those of you that use Google Forms know that it has the capability of pulling that data into a spreadsheet. So that would assist in collecting your data during this time. So that's an overview of what has been uploaded to our Kentucky DOE support site to support you and your staff during this time of COVID-19. We hope that you will place this site somewhere on your desktop or bookmark it on your toolbar for easy accessibility. And please feel free to share this with your teachers.
All right, I think we have one more slide, and then we need your feedback.
Okay, so really quick, I'm going to do this in 30 seconds or less. Co-teaching, yes, it should still be occurring. The key part right now is not to necessarily have the exact same expectations because we are doing it virtually, but co-teachers should be planning together to figure out how to do this. So therefore, whether they're choosing to both be on a Zoom or one's doing the main Zoom and the other one's doing breakout rooms, it can be a variety of ways. But the most important thing is that the leadership at the district is still making sure that that expectation is there. Right now, more than any time ever, we need teachers working together to meet the needs of students. Okay, Debbie, turning it over to you.
All right, well, please reach out to us at the co-ops if you need anything. We will be uploading this PowerPoint with links for you so you can get to the resources. And on the very last slide, we have a QR code and a link. If you would please let us know how this worked for you and if these resources and this information was good for you. And if you have any practical feedback on how we can improve it from week to week, please let us know. We thank you for coming, and go get them.
Okay, so while everyone is hopefully doing their feedback survey, I'm just going to preview the next webcast we will have with the special education regional cooperatives. It will be on meaningful progress monitoring, and that is set for next Friday, April 10th at the same time, 11 a.m. Eastern. We will send out a link to join that webcast as well over the DOS listserv, just like we did this one. As a reminder, this is recorded and we will have this available on the KDE website. We will send the link to that website out as well. I just want to thank the co-ops for this great presentation, and we are looking forward to additional resources in our next series. Thank you all for joining.